Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar on Journey of a Stolen Check, Tax Season Edition. We appreciate you joining us today. My name is Carrie Cantley. I'm the Vice President of Digital Banking Strategies for Mitek. And with me today, I have Gary Warner, who has got an incredible amount of experience, not only with scams and all things criminal, but he also is the Director of Research and Computer Forensics at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. And he also is a director for an organization called Dark Tower, who actually specializes in investigations, scam activity, and just being an overall intelligence providing agency for their business partners. Gary, anything to add there before we jump in?
No, that sounds pretty good, Carrie. Looking forward to talking with you today.
Absolutely. So thanks for joining us today. Well, let's go ahead and jump right in, kind of to talk about the state of the state. Check fraud, as we all know, continues to be a significant exposure for not only financial institutions, but significantly impacting the consumer and commercial environment today. Over 500,000 suspicious activity reports filed last year related to check fraud. A significant amount of lawsuits, both for the financial institutions as well as those that are victims of check fraud. And I believe it's safe to say in statistics and other things that 1 in 4 banking customers will leave if they're a victim of check fraud in today's environments. And about 20% of those customers not only will leave their financial institution, but also they will tell a friend or tell a friend's friend if they're a victim, regardless of if the bank did anything wrong or not, right? It's an occurrence that they feel passionate about once they are a victim, and they will continue to tell their friends either about what happened, the event associated with it, and if they did have a good experience or not, related to that check fraud exposure. I think we should start with a poll though, Gary. Let's kind of ask the audience here from a statistics perspective, how are they feeling about check fraud? Are they still seeing it as a significant issue for them? It's increasing, but it's kind of staying flat. Has it stayed the same, or are they not potentially seeing that impact? I think I know the answer to this question, but it's always interesting to see what the audience in this particular case feels, especially because the environment that we saw in 2023 and even pre-2023 in the COVID era, we'll say, when mail theft started to rise and the issues started to become a predominant challenge for institutions again. So we'll give them a minute kind of to answer this poll in terms of, you know, how they're feeling about check fraud. I think it's always interesting, you know, when you think about check fraud and checks, you know, 40% of businesses still use checks as their primary, you know, way of exchanging money and paying not only their invoices, but their customers or consumers. So this is always an interesting, you know, kind of environment to be in when check being the payment method that everybody keeps saying is going away. However, we are where we are with check fraud. So we'll see if everybody's responded to that poll. And I'm not surprised. Gary, do these numbers surprise you any? 50% said it's increasing, not staying flat. 30% say, yeah, it's increasing, but not much more than last year. And no, a very small portion, you know, 20%-ish say, no, it's either the same or actually declined, which I'm impressed. If we're seeing some institutions or those that are with us today saying it's declined, great, keep doing what you're doing. Gary, any comments on what you see here?
No, this is very similar to what I saw at a recent ABA conference. We did a poll of the audience as well. And I was amazed that so many people were still saying it was one of their primary forms of loss.
Yeah, you know, a tried and true payment method. Sometimes makes it easier from an entry perspective into fraud, but also provides a challenge because it is a legacy payment method. So very, very consistent with what we see from a statistical perspective, what FinCEN and others are reporting around how prevalent check fraud really is. So let's kind of talk about that increase now that we kind of all are agreeing we're on that same page of, yes, it's increasing substantially. We're kind of seeing, even if it is flat, it's the same as last year. Let's kind of talk about what is it that's driving that, how that is perpetrating in the kind of the industry, what the problems are around that, and then kind of what do you see, Gary? What's happening out there besides mail theft, or in addition to mail theft? What is really driving this check fraud craze, I'll call it, from a problem perspective, as well as the amount of dollars that are being lost right now?
Yeah, during the pandemic, we saw the criminal activity drive heavily to Telegram. And this was something that was related to all of the unemployment scams that we saw. Once the CARES Act money went away, we started calling this Telegram fraud wave 2. Wave 2 was all of the scammers who learned how to do unemployment fraud, and many people who'd never been involved in the fraud industry before came to Telegram to learn how to do the unemployment fraud. And so the Telegram crime wave just continued. Most of the people who are buying and selling these checks to do fraud are doing so on Telegram. And that's been our primary thing that we see. Of course, all of this is driven by the widespread knowledge that the arrow key is the key to mail theft. So arrow keys, for anyone in the audience who doesn't know, that's the key that a postal worker can use to unlock the blue boxes. But it doesn't just unlock the blue boxes, it unlocks the cluster boxes in apartment complexes and in gated communities and in business offices where there's a shared mail room. And once the criminals realize that I can get this key and it will allow me to open any box and steal the mail from it, that really is what launched the crime wave.
Yeah, and so what I think, and so Telegram's still out there. They use Facebook, other methods, right? They are really good at communicating with each other where these hot spots are. Like you said, the arrow keys are for sale out there, all of those things. You know, we've got a picture on the screen. It's got all of these U.S. Treasury checks. This is tax season. This webinar is about tax season time. When you look at what's happening out there and these items or the stolen mail opportunity, let's talk about how easy it is for them to find what they're looking for, right? So I get a key. I'm going after the stolen mail. I know checks are hot. I'm going to sell them for an average of what, $250 to up to $1,000 a check, depending on the type of check it is and how I guarantee that you'll get to cash it, which I'd love to hear you talk about. How are they going about, especially during this time of year, and even like, you know, I'll talk about Treasury checks as a whole, the different types of Treasury checks. Are these a target because of what we see on the screen here? I can see it, I can identify it, I know it's guaranteed cash. Kind of talk to us about that environment as well. So
Treasury checks have been the primary check, not by a wide margin all along. So going back as early as when we started keeping statistics in last summer, every single month that we looked at, the number one brand, if you will, that was being targeted was Treasury. Although last summer it was by a narrow margin over some of the more significant financial institutions. What we've seen happen, in addition to the ease of caching, is the criminals have learned how to do open ups. And an open up is what allows them to process a check without regard to who the check is written to. So if the Treasury check is written to an individual, what happens is that the criminal will either go into a bank themselves or use an online process to create a new bank account in the name of whoever is written on that check. And especially with some of our mid-size and smaller institutions, their urgency to increase their customer count has reduced friction on new open-ups. And the criminals know it's very easy to fake the documents that are necessary to open up an account, especially for those FIs that have the ability to open an account entirely online without anyone going into a physical facility. Well, if I've got a new account and it matches the name on that Treasury check, that's easy money. And there's two parts to that. One is that it's easy to open the account and use the Treasury check as my initial deposit. But the second part of that is the Treasury system doesn't allow the banks to put a hold on the check. So where you might say, I'm going to put a 2-week hold on this initial check deposit because this is a new customer and we just want to be safe here, a Treasury check is not allowed to have such a hold placed on it. So in most cases, the funds are either instantly available or available the following business day. And that is one of the reasons that Treasury checks are so highly sought after. Now, the situation with the image on the right there with the purple background, one of the other things that we've noticed with Treasury checks is that we're starting to see more and more collusive postal employees. Postal's having the same problem everyone is. If you're trying to hire customer service reps, you know what the market is like for new employees right now. And so Postal has a new category of employee that's not the same, career track. It's more a low-end hourly person. And a lot of these are doing the processing in mail rooms, especially where you get a whole tray of checks that come in from Treasury to be distributed. And when you see those bulk grabs of Treasury checks from one criminal, it's not that they've stolen the mail out of the destination, they've stolen it in stream. And what we've seen many occasions of is someone who's affiliated with a traditional street gang recruiting or placing their members into these hourly postal jobs that give them access to these trays of mail. And if I have a whole tray of mail that's coming in from Treasury, it's easy to slip 10 or 20 into my uniform pocket and walk out of the postal facility with it and pass it to my collusive on the outside.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. It's a sophisticated, right, process that they have in place to find that person that can be the postal worker or on the inside there, bring that information out, and then either sell it in wholesale like we see on this screen, right, at the individual check level, or create those environments where they can create fake IDs, set up accounts, new accounts, deposit this. Availability is, well, yeah, that check is good, right? Even if you check in the Treasury and go through the process of putting an initial hold on it, which the Treasury, and some of their changes have in place, we do a check, right? They do a serial check, amount check, everything looks good. Check looks good. Yep, it's good. Then those funds are available and the criminal walks away with the cash. It is a very interesting dynamic of a true supply chain management capability that they put in place here. Would you kind of agree? Kind of that's what you see, right, in these events. So I can buy it at the dollar level, right, the check level, take advantage of me being my own entrepreneur as a criminal, or there's a sophisticated supply chain that they have within these criminal activity environments where they basically own it all. And at the end of the day, walk away with the money, the funds.
That's right. And we do see clusters on the blue box theft side where there are certain zip codes in certain areas that have a true problem with mail theft on the outside of the system. But the mail theft inside the system is certainly rising, and it's something that we need to call attention to.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I think you hit on just one element to this, especially during tax season. Everybody wants their refund. They want it quick. these checks seem to be easier to cash. Would you agree, right? The process, because it has U.S. Treasury on it, people tend to feel more confident in the fact that it isn't fraud, it's not a fake check, and tend to be a little more easily, to go through the process of cashing it because of the fact that it's a Treasury check. Do you kind of feel like, that's how buyers are getting kind of this advancement through the process of cashing these checks and being able to walk away with the funds?
Well, there's two things, but that's definitely part of it. The second aspect of a Treasury check and the relationship to the mail system, many of your listeners may not know this, but you can cash a Treasury check at the post office. So the post office, as a service to the unbanked, has the responsibility of offering the service of cashing Treasury checks. Well, many times the check is a greater amount than what they have available in the check drawer, and what they will issue instead is a U.S. postal money order. And so this is the other area where we'll often see an initial bank account open up, but now it doesn't have any name associated with it. A counterfeit ID got them the cash or the money order at the post office. Yeah. Now they come and take the money order and use that as the instrument of an initial deposit. So especially when you're seeing someone make a very large deposit of money orders, and then following that with some activity going out to either fast payment systems, whether it's Zelle, Venmo, Cash App, or whether it's going out to a cryptocurrency exchange. So one of the models that we've seen, or a typology that we've seen, is Treasury check deposit or money order deposit, postal money order deposits that immediately exit either through fast payments or out to a cryptocurrency exchange. And that typology is something that could be put into fraud rules and easily detected, I believe.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? Some step up validation, new account, cash-like, right? Deposits being cash-like, either a Treasury or money order, and then also some expediency to get it from the institution and Zelle it or Cash App it or some other crypto activity. Maybe a good thought process from a fraud rule perspective from within an institution to detect that kind of account risk at that level, because it's not necessarily now at the check level, it's at the account level that you see some of that. So very interesting.
I think we have some questions if we wanted to take some of those now. Erin, are you going to help us with that?
Yeah, while we flag those, let's go ahead and set up the next poll, because I think that'll help too around, do we think that customers are informed about the risk related to mailing checks? So let's kind of, it's that yes, no, unsure. I mean, I certainly am informed. However, I mail checks still sometimes because I have no other alternative, right? In certain types of payments. So how well do we think our customers are, or consumers as a whole, are informed about the risk of mailing checks? I know there's been a lot of work by different organizations and even the U.S. Post Office and other organizations to say, don't mail your checks. If you have to mail it, take it to your post office and do some of that. But it's interesting, and it'll be interesting to see what this audience feels around consumer information and how well they are informed about the challenge. Sometimes what you find is you never think it's going to be you until that happens. So it'll be, kind of interesting to see how everybody thinks about it from a polling perspective as we go through this question. And then we'll answer maybe some of the questions from the audience as we go through this as well once we get through this poll. Okay, well, 20% say yes, 66% say no. Customers are not necessarily informed at the risk related to mailing checks. And then 12%, it's like, well, maybe, maybe not. I think this is directionally correct from everything else that we see out there. So let's pop some of these questions up and see what we've got here. when a Treasury check returns to the post office, do they invalidate the money orders issued? Oh, that's a great process question that I think I don't know the answer to, that we may have to follow up. I don't know. Gary, have you heard that they do put a stop or invalidate on the money order side? I think that's a good follow-up question. I'm not sure. Have you heard anything around that relational circle of life of fraud turns into money order, turns into a money order stop payment for fraud?
I am not aware of anything that is in place to that effect at the moment. It's a good question for a follow-up, but I'll be happy to ask some friends at Postal, but I'm not aware of anything like that right now.
Exactly. Yeah, we can certainly follow up on that one because that's an interesting cycle of returned stop payments, and then what does the bank do with that stop payment on the money order? And will they have that in time in order to hold the funds or to stop the funds from being circulated out of the institution? Let's see, I'm looking for another interesting question here. Are we seeing this postal fraud in specific states? Are there any we should focus on?
Yeah, I think there are certain states that we see almost every time as the top ones. There's huge activity in this space in the greater Miami, Florida area. So Miami, Florida area, Brooklyn, New York, New Jersey, and certain parts of Pennsylvania are kind of our top four almost every single time we run the numbers.
Okay. So those would be really good place to put some additional stringent account opening, fraud type rules on, or where you're seeing some of this translation of or stolen theft, U.S. Treasury check theft challenges there. And then I saw a really good one, and Gary, you found one that you would like to answer?
Yeah, Chris McGee asks, can you talk more about how criminals are able to open accounts online with a stolen check? Shouldn't the bank be asking for some type of identification? And I think that's a very important part for us to raise awareness to. Driver's licenses are counterfeited now so easily in every state. And again, with the access that we have with Telegram-based criminals, anyone can order a counterfeit ID. You send a photograph and the personal details of what you would like printed, and what you get back is a complete identity set. Usually they'll give you a social security card, a driver's license with the photo of your choice with the bank customer's details, and then you often will also get a debit card that corresponds to that account. In this case, we've seen many examples in the court record of criminals who have placed someone inside the financial institution. They're passing that identity information out, but after we get that license made, someone walks into the bank claiming to be the bank customer, because most FIs do not have photo matching at the cash window. They are able to do a lot of interesting things there. But opening a new account, it's really child's play to get those driver's license fakes that would be required for that. We've seen them as low as $15. A full identity kit is often available for $40 to $75.
Yeah, and we know that there's been some significant, Department of Motor Vehicle breaches. And so there's a lot of data out there, and you can create from that based on templates, depending on the state, right, pretty easily, and then create those IDs from there.
The ID processors have, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Gary.
The people making these IDs have holograms, hologram covers for every single state. It's really quite sophisticated. And then with the mobile deposit feature, once that account's open, they don't even have to walk in to deposit the check. They just take a picture of it. So
Yeah. And that brings us kind of to what I've got up here. This was focused kind of on that fate of the stolen check and, the folks, the players that are involved in this fraud ecosystem. I think you hit on it a little bit even when we were talking just now about IDs, right? How do I start? I got a kit, all of those things. And also what I find is interesting, especially during this time of year with tax scams and other things, like I was talking to a connection that we have at the Identity Threat Resource Center, and he said actually this year, the ID.me kind of, government ID kind of website that's out there, they saw about 5% kind of in that scam reports from identity theft perspective last year. And already this year, it's up to 20% of scam identified associated with somebody asking or wanting information associated with ID.me. So, are these kind of, has the organization shifted? Are the people or, the players changing? Are they really going after that whole end-to-end? Is it not just, especially as we think about tax season scams and what's happening on the check fraud side, are they really going now after the full relationship? Like, I've got Carrie's check, I know her data, it's tax season, I'm going to push a scam to her and we're going to see if we can get more data. Like, are there some more interconnected players here that are, that we see when it comes to what's going on, especially during tax season time?
Right. So one of the things that we've been telling people is if you have an opportunity to register your ID.me with the government, for example, SSA.gov, go ahead and register yourself and get your identity on file with ID.me at SSA or other places. The idea is that if you are already registered, it prevents someone else from becoming you. What we're seeing with regard to tax fraud in particular, the numbers are going up a lot as far as the average number that people are doing a tax refund fraud on. And this is partly because they're not going after the individuals as much as they're going after businesses. So one of the things that we've been seeing asked for and provided as a criminal service quite frequently this year is EIN numbers. And so we've had for some time now, all the way back through the pandemic, people who have phished law enforcement members in order to get access to TLO XP. TLO is a TransUnion service for looking up identities, and it does provide driver's license information as well, and it's a favorite of the criminals. But this year, we've been seeing the TLO XP lookups, which is how they get enough identity data about you in order to file taxes on your behalf. So if you haven't filed your taxes, the criminals will submit a tax refund request on your behalf using your stolen identity information in order to get a refund. But what they've realized is if they go after businesses instead of individuals, they can get the number quite significantly higher. So where we might be trying to get a $20,000 cash refund from a individual, it's often that they're going after $100,000 to $150,000 tax refund by filing a counterfeit claim for taxes on behalf of a business. So this EIN lookup service that's been growing in popularity is to allow people to file a tax return on behalf of a business and then direct the refund to an account that's controlled by the criminal.
Very interesting, kind of that shift of higher dollars, right? And how do we get to there? And businesses always equals that. And are you finding, a lot with these scams, or what's happening on the tax fraud scam side is the fraud itself is actually starting with a fraudulent tax submission, then turns into a good U.S. Treasury check, and then that U.S. Treasury check is then used to open a new account, and then they walk away with a really large refund. and it's either the IRS is holding the bag, right? Because, or the bank, or, you know, whoever, depending on where you are, kind of from a circumstantial perspective in that process.
That's right. And on your perp board there, the forger plays a key role here. So a lot of these false tax returns, there are certain documents that they will prepare in order to help the credibility of the tax refund filing. So whether that's well, there's just so many things that they could be doing, but the idea is that they're going to be able to create a bank account for that business in order to deposit that tax return check.
Very large
into.
check.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so forging some business documents related to that to help them have the credibility to open that account is part of it.
And that makes a lot of sense. And speaking of large dollars, let's ask the audience what they think the largest dollar amount. And this is just from our data. Gary, you have maybe seen higher. So let's just kind of see. So from our data, what do you all as an audience think the largest U.S. Treasury tax refund check is that we've found so far sold on the criminal marketplace? So we partner with Dark Tower and some of the things that we do. Kind of let's see what the audience thinks. Is it a 1.5 million, 6.9, 433, 76,000? These are all still pretty big numbers, right? That we see. They're not the $100 check, right? These are large dollar checks. So I'll be curious. We're getting through this poll here, what people think. But regardless, if U.S. Treasury checks are the #1, they're selling templates. You can buy a template, create your own U.S. Treasury check, or you can steal a whole bunch and sell them, or you can be part of these scams from a dollar perspective. With the dollars that we see on the screen, even if one was successful, I'm a winner, right? I've hit the lottery, right? Whether it's 76,000 or, you know, 6.9 million. If I can get that through a process on the other side that turns into some kind of cash or benefit for me, and my investment of time is probably marginal because this data is out there, right, in the public. It is no longer dark. Like I say, the dark web is not dark. It's out there right in front of us in the public. You know, it's always interest to me, right, how easy this is. Now, we're seeing a lot of enforcement. We're seeing a lot of things, you know, being done to try to curtail this. 41% said 1.5 million, 28.8, almost 30% said 6.9, and then it kind of goes down from there. Actually, 6.9, we saw a $6.9 million Treasury check for sale through our data. So, you know,
so I know,
Carrie,
we had a question about checking whether a Treasury check is real. And I think some people will already know this, but there is a system called the Treasury check verification system. I'm curious, did the 6.9 million pass a verification? Was it a legit check?
It was a valid check. Yeah, I mean, it was a commercial valid check. Now, whether that got sold and then tried to process and somehow it got stopped, we don't, you know, the end, and that's the end of the story. We don't necessarily know how that ended up, you know, what happened with that particular check, but we do know it was, you know, a check out there that we saw where we could read not only the dollar amount, but name, address, and other things associated with that check that were out there for sale on Telegram. Which is, you know, again, tax season's full swing. Definitely going to be driving that check fraud. We will talk about how are there ways, tips and tricks. The Treasury has a lot of information out there. It's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing, a challenging thing, because you want the banks and others to be armed with information on how to tell a good Treasury check from a bad Treasury check. However, the criminals have that access as well. Which is why, you know, I always find it interesting, like you said, right, there's demo tools. I can sell you the template. I know how to teach you how to do it. All of those things that are out there are really for sale. I want to talk a little bit about tax scams specifically. So we've talked a lot about U.S. Treasury checks and kind of the rebate side or the Treasury checks when it comes to, the tax season deposits and the checks there. The scam side is always very interesting to me because, we read articles that it was like, I would have never thought I would have been part of that scam, right? It sounds too good to be true. It always is. However, right, they are really good. These folks that are perpetrating these scams are really good at convincing the person on the other side of the equation to participate with them or unknowingly give out information that allows them to be part of these scams. Can you talk about like the trends that you're seeing from a tax scam perspective? I think you were talking about one, for example, it was like, hey, if you give me this information, I can not only give you more money, but we'll split the difference, or, some of those that you're seeing out there that people may want to, inform their customers about, and making sure that they're, think about it, think twice before they use someone to actually file their taxes for them.
Yeah, one of the things that we've seen is a lot of scammers are offering, they call them methods or sauce. Methods and sauce are both just tutorials on how to conduct a tax refund fraud. So that's a very popular term that we will see, especially in some of the criminal Facebook groups. And unfortunately, there are thousands of such groups. So it's not only Telegram. We also see, especially in this area, we see the criminals offering tutorials on how to conduct these scams. So this gentleman, Gambler Maine, there is one of them that is a very prominent poster on Facebook. We've seen him active in more than 100 different Facebook groups, and he was active in tax season last year as well. So he was selling a method, and what they're offering as their proofs that their method works is they'll show screenshots of their either a deposit of a refund check or a screenshot showing that the IRS has accepted their refund. And so this is just some of the ways that they demonstrate that their method is a method that's going to work for you. So these methods, they may sell for between $50 and $100 the method. However, if you'd like them to conduct the fraud as a partner, that's where you get into a profit sharing situation.
Cool. Profit sharing. I love it. I think that's just so interesting to me. And what's even, it's not funny, right? I mean, this is serious, but it's just like, not only are they willing to walk you through the scam, but they're guaranteeing their method works, right? It's like almost a money back guarantee. It's just incredibly amazing to me, not only how, bold it is, but that, people are willing to go through this process, and they're going to walk them through it, and it's not going to be a problem. They're going to get them what they need. So I always find that interesting. So when we talk, I think I see a couple questions here in terms of, how are institutions handling this? If somebody walks in the door with some of these Treasury checks that are fraud, or how are they detecting third-party fraud, or what is that kind of what's happening within the branch or the financial institutions when something like this happens? I mean, I've heard a couple different ways, right? Where, they want to protect the person in the branch or in the credit union that's sitting in front of this client. So they're, saying, thank you, deposit it, tomorrow come back for availability if they do know it's fraud. And then, following up with law enforcement and other things so that, right, that doesn't cause kind of some interference on the branch level. It's very similar on the mobile side, right? You reject it immediately, close out the account. Putting in some of these business rules like we talked about. So if you start to see funds go out of the account that are suspicious in any way, put a hold, do some step-up authentication. There's ways to kind of whittle through what I call the needle of the needle sometimes, and it's all around knowing your customer, using right intelligence, and making sure that those on the right within the financial institution branch and credit unions that are sitting in front of the customer are very aware of what to look for, all the way through to your fraud analyst and then partnering, whether it's with law enforcement or even the Treasury or the IRS, to validate things if you have questions. I think it's important to remember we have a supply chain just like they do to validate these and protect everybody along the way as well. So don't think of it as a one-stop shop, but kind of an end-to-end approach, especially during this time of the year. That's going to be important. Anything to add there, Gary?
Well, just another thing, that one of the methods that we're seeing for a new type of scam is people who claim to be tax refund processors or who will file taxes on your behalf will offer large advances on your potential refund. And sometimes what they're doing is making this claim that they're having some special, or they're part of a government program that's going to double your tax refund. And they're just stealing your identity and letting you validate. So if there's an ID me to pass or whatever, they're having you do that. But then they're having the refund checks sent to themselves, so that because that's part of it, they're promising they're going to give you a larger than expected refund, but that's because they're filing fraudulent refunds on your behalf. Many of them are just flat up stealing the money, but they're convincing people to share identity documents with them in order to make the refund more credible.
Yeah, and are they, when that happens, do then you see the circular, now I'm a victim of identity theft, on top of the fact that they just, did the tax scam? Like, is there a perpetration of additional activity that happens from that? I would assume so.
I can't say for certain, but that's our expectation as well.
Yeah, makes sense. As we talk through this, let's do another poll while we kind of go down this path, and that's kind of around check fraud. Is resolving check fraud more difficult or equally challenging as other payments fraud? Is check more difficult than real time or wire or ACH? Is it the same, or is it less difficult? Sometimes the legacy payments over time, the legacy payment solutions actually become more difficult to detect fraud. However, the new payment models and methods, are not as honed in, from a security and control perspective, maybe as check is, because it's been around for a while. So I'll be interested to kind of see from the team, from those that are on the call with us today, what they think about, the challenge of check fraud related to payment fraud and what they think there. So if you guys could do that poll for us. And while I do that poll, let's find a question here that we can answer while the poll is being asked. Is there a dollar amount for a personal tax return that would be considered suspicious? That's an interesting one. I don't necessarily know if there is, right? I mean, maybe if you know your customer, and you understand their transactional activity and what they got last year versus this year, maybe there's some things there that would indicate that something suspicious is maybe happening, and maybe it's not them. Maybe they're, like you said, a victim of fraud that could be there. I don't necessarily know if you're going to tell just by the refund itself.
Well, I think the thing to watch for there, many of the criminals are using kind of as their base number for individual tax refunds, $20,000. $20,000 would be an unusual tax refund. If it's going to a normal customer with a well-established history with your financial institution, that's probably still okay. What we're really looking for is a tax refund greater than $20,000 into a brand new account. If there's a new account creation associated with that, that would be kind of the signal level for me, is just based on the communications we're observing between the criminals, $20,000 does seem to be their target baseline for a fraudulent tax refund.
That's interesting.
But again, I would pair that with a new account creation.
Oh, okay. All right, so just enough of a tax refund that it's not going to, people's eyebrows aren't going to go up and question it. However, it's enough of a tax refund that even if I get a partial part of that and walk out the door, like we said, right, the value proposition is I've won. That makes some sense there. Okay, so everybody is saying that it is more difficult today for check fraud than it is other payments fraud. I'm wondering, and I'm just, as we've talked about mail theft on the rise and some of the ways that check fraud is starting to creep up, forgeries are getting better. Alterations are hard to detect in some of the mobile and ATM channels. And they have more information and available data to make good forgeries or good checks, fraudulent checks look good. And I think that's probably what's driving some of that.
I think part of it too, before we get to this Treasury validation, is that the name matching, because of the frequency of the availability of counterfeit identities, it's so easy to pass a name match now. And when one FI's validating an account, if they even do name matching, if the name is correct, they assume the account is correct. We don't know what account a check is written to. We only know the name that the check was written to. And so we're seeing two things. One is the counterfeit identities that we've already spoken about. I can open a check in the name of the person or a bank account in the name of the person whose check I've received very easily using a counterfeit identity now. And these are high quality counterfeits. Most police officers would not be able to tell the difference. Your bank teller is certainly not going to be able to tell the difference. The second part, though, is I also can easily open a corporate bank account in the name of anything I want by creating a bank account or a business license. Our favorite one here in Alabama, we have a young man who stole a check from Amazon Web Services and filed with the state of Alabama. He is Amazon Web Services, Inc. in Dothan, Alabama. You can look it up on the Secretary of State's website. He needed to have that Secretary of State proof that he was the business. But once you have it, what are you going to say if you're the bank? No, I don't think you are. If he's showing you a business license issued by your state, you don't really have a lot of play there. And so between those two, easy use of counterfeit identities and the easy creation of a fake business that matches what's written on the check, we're seeing these are much harder to catch.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. That's why depositor review is so important. Some of these check and image capabilities are so important. Being able to detect, like you said, counterfeiters are really good. They're good, but there's other ways that you can detect where there could be potential fraud just by doing not only image analysis, but taking that image analysis and also comparing it to other things like velocity and account intelligence. Because it's U.S. Treasury tax scam is our focus, what we thought we would end with is just, are there ways where you can tell if it truly is a forged Treasury check? And the answer is yes, either through image analysis in fraud detection tools or manual inspection of a check for those in the teller, the front line. But you can also certainly detect these through mobile capture and other ways if the technology solutions are there. We've put some resources in there, but we wanted to highlight some things that we typically see that fraudsters forget about. So what we're seeing is a reoccurrence of, I had last year's check, and so now I'm just going to redeposit last year's check plus this year's check. And they're forgetting there's different areas that the check date exists on, for example, a U.S. Treasury check. And so one of the things that you can compare is in the microline, there's particular information. That microline data as you can see, the top is all green. That's a good example. And the one below it, for example, is a mocked up fraudulent item. And they've changed information on the check, but they forgot certain things, right? So they forgot to change the date in one of the fields, but they changed it on the microline, or vice versa, we see. There's information in the memo line. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they don't. So there's a partial name in the memo line. That partial name should actually be connected to the name on the check that's written there. There's lots of different fields. There's a specific type of check, like Treasury, tax refunds have a particular, formatting or serial type of information. Social Security checks have, and sometimes they kind of get those mixed up, where you'll see information that's on a Social Security check that really is assigned to a tax rebate check. So there's elements within the check itself where Treasuries, put out this information. Again, this is if you Google it, it's out there. We found this information, but there's a lot of good resources out there for those that are within the check processing and the banks and the financial institutions. But it's always good to have some technology behind the scenes that can do some of this for you. Font difference is a huge catch for us. So we see things where the name address has been altered, right? And you can tell because the font is very different. We sometimes see the dollar amount altered, but it's not the same font, or the characters are a little different. So if they're altering that check, there are ways that you can take some of the information that's out there. Thank you, Treasury, for putting it out there for those that want to use that. Or there is the Treasury verification service, where let's just say it is, they changed the $1,000 rebate check or refund check from $1,000 to $100,000. You can certainly put in that check information into the Treasury site and verify the dollar amount in the check. But we do see these differences. These are things that you can certainly take advantage of if you don't have technology that picks it up and you're not using that for fraud detection. You can physically look at these keys and clues on a check to detect that fraud. Gary, anything to add there?
I think you've pretty much covered that. The mismatch on the date is the one that I think is the one we've seen most frequently on our side. But again, if you have access to the verification system, the URL is there on the screen under helpful resources. That first one is a way you can do it manually, although of course, Mitek has automated solutions for that as well.
Okay, I think we're getting close to the top of the hour. We have a phenomenal amount of engagement and questions here in the Q&A panel. We will answer these questions. We will respond to these particular questions that are here. We appreciate the questions and the interaction from those that have submitted questions, and we'll certainly respond to those. You'll also get in your email, for those that maybe weren't able to stay the whole time, or that for you all that have participated with us to pass this webinar on, you'll get a recording that may be helpful or insightful for those that are within your institution. Gary, thank you as always for participating with us. If you don't follow Gary on LinkedIn, you can not only learn a lot, but stay connected to what are the most recent advice, as well as scams or concerns that are out there. He's a great resource for those of us that are in the fraud fighting business, I'll call it. So again, thank you so much, Gary, for joining us today. We appreciate it. Everybody have a great afternoon. If there's any follow-up questions, you can certainly reach out to Gary or myself on LinkedIn. But we'll certainly pass on all the answers to these questions today. So have a great afternoon. Appreciate it, everybody, and take care.
Thanks so much, Carrie.